Hey guys, I'm T and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, we make trendy and fun crochet tutorials twice a week. And if you haven't already, smash that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to join in on the fun. Today I'll be showing you how to make a cute peplum top. Our design drafts have been skewing more feminine lately and I'm not mad at it. This top in particular is a comfy bundle sweetness that's fit for anyone who's looking for a cuteness overload. Speaking of, if you're looking for something cute to crochet, you're in the right place. We've got hundreds of modern crochet designs with many styles for every member of the family, with more coming, so consider clicking the bell to subscribe and you'll never miss an upload. Also, do me a huge favor and give this video a thumbs up if you like it, or 2 thumbs down if you don't. Either way, it's a great way to show support so you can keep putting out free tutorials every Wednesday and Sunday. Now it's time to get on the show, so without further ado, for this project, any category for yarn will work, but I used a total of 450 grams of yarn, and that's 1,000 yards if you're stateside. As for tools, a 5mm hook, scissors, stitch markers, and a tape measure. There is a written pattern down below. Use offer code TCDDIY for a discount off any $9.99 plus order. Enter this week's pattern giveaway by telling us what is your current guilty pleasure. For me, mine has to be binge watching reality TV shows. Details for the giveaway down below. We're using 4 stitches for this project, and they'll be as follows. Chain, slip stitch, single crochet, half double crochet, and double crochet. This tutorial is for size small, but you can adjust it for your size, and we explain how to in the video, so let's get started. Getting this top started, we're first going to grab our category 4 yarn and make a slip knot. Next, we're going to grab our 5mm hook, and we're all going to start by making an even number chain that reaches from about 1 inch right underneath your underarm to right underneath your bust. So I need a total of 3.5 inches or 9 centimeters. So I'm going to start by making a chain of 14. Now that we have our chain, we're going to get started with our first row in our 4-row repeat, and that's going to be a moss stitch row. So we're all going to start by blocking off that last chain, and we're going to start with a chain 2. Now that first chain is going to count as our turning chain, and then that second chain is going to count as a chain. That's going to make more sense in a second. And what we're going to do from here is single crochet into the 4th chain from our hook. So counting together, here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, and then here's 4. Into that 4th chain, we're going to bring our hook down into there and insert with just 1 single crochet, and we have just formed our first chain space. Now let's do this again. We're going to now chain 1, skip that following chain, and then into the chain right after that, insert with a single crochet. And now all together we should have 2 chain spaces. Let's do this again. Chain 1, skip a chain, into that following, a single crochet, and that's it. We're going to continue to do this until we don't have any more chains left. So just as a refresher, we're going to chain 1, skip a chain, and then into the following, single crochet. Alright, so now that we have made our way all the way down to the end of our row 1, we're going to get started on our second row in our 4-row repeat, which is going to be another moss stitch row. So every time we're getting started on our moss stitch row, we're going to do a chain 2. That first chain is still going to count as our turning chain. That second chain is going to count as a chain, and then we're going to flip our work. Now doing the second moss stitch row, we're always going to be single crocheting into the chain spaces. So what we're going to do is skip the first stitch from our previous row, which should be a single crochet from our previous row, into that following stitch, which is our chain space. Just insert your hook into that entire gap with a single crochet, and that forms our first chain space for the second row. Let's do this again. We're going to chain 1, skip the following stitch, which is a single crochet, and then into that following stitch, which should be a chain space, insert with a single crochet. So just continue to chain 1, skip a stitch, and then single crochet into that following stitch until we reach the end of the row. Alright, so we are back and we have just finished up our second row in our 4-row repeat. And from here, the 2 following rows will be back loop slip stitch rows. But since this is the underarm, we're going to be increasing on one side so we can have a really smooth curve all the way up to our shoulder. So what we're going to do from here is chain 1 and flip our work. Now to do our first back loop slip stitch, we're going to find the last stitch from our previous row. We're going to insert our hook in through that back loop or the loop that's furthest away from us. We're going to insert, yarn over, and then pull through everything on our hook. Now a really quick tip that I have when it comes to doing our back loop slip stitches is once when we pull all the way through, make sure that we're not accidentally tugging too tightly on our working yarn, otherwise the following row will be a little too tight to work into. So let's do this again. Find that next available stitch and insert your hook in through that back loop, yarn over, pull through everything. Once more, into that following stitch, insert, yarn over, pull through everything. And we're going to continue to do this, making our way all the way down until we have just one stitch left. Alright, so my row 3 is all finished up. I have just one stitch left, and now into that last stitch we're going to be doing an increase of 2 back loop slip stitches. So just to get the first one done, we're going to insert our hook into that last stitch's back loop, yarn over, pull through everything. And then to do the increase, we're actually going to be doing one more back loop slip stitch into that same last stitch. But doing the second slip stitch could be a little difficult whenever we're doing an increase. So as we're inserting our hook into that same back loop, yarn over and pull through, make sure that we're definitely not tugging too tightly after this stitch. Otherwise this last stitch right here can be lost when we get into the other row. But once we finish our increase, we're going to get started on our row 4 for our 4-row repeat, which is going to be another slip stitch row. Now since we're along the top, we're going to start with an increase. So just chain 1 and flip our work. Now to do our increase again, we're going to be inserting our hook into the last stitch from our previous row, inserting into that back loop with one back loop slip stitch, and then another back loop slip stitch into that same back loop. So yarn over and pull through everything on our hook. And once we have that increase, we're going to continue to put one back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And a really quick tip that I have, once when we end this row, we just want to make sure that we have an even number of stitches, because whenever we do our moss stitch needs to be worked into an even number. So at the end of this row, just double check your work, and then I will meet you guys back. Alright, so we are back, and our second moss stitch row is all finished up. Now for the remainder of the top half of this piece, it's going to be this 4-row repeat. So 2 moss stitch rows, and then 2 back loop slip stitch rows. So since we just finished up our 4th row, we're going to get started on our row 5 together, and we're going to start again with our moss stitch row. So like I said in one of our previous clips, to start off our moss stitch row, we're always going to start with a chain 2. So there's 1, there's our second, and then we're going to flip our work. And now from here, we're going to skip that first stitch into the following, insert with a single crochet. That forms our first chain space. And chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet, and continue to do this, making our way all the way down. Alright, so I've made my way down with my first moss stitch row, and I just wanted to meet you guys back just to show you guys that it does look like I'm at the end of my row, but I have just one stitch left. But if you guys turn this over and look carefully, you guys can see that we have 1, and then our second stitch right there. So if it looks like you just have 1 stitch left, just double check and make sure that our second stitch isn't tucked underneath. But since mine is, I'm going to continue to just do a chain 1, skip my following stitch, and then into the stitch right after that, a single crochet, and now this 5th row is all finished up. And all we're going to do from here is just continue to repeat our 4 previous rows until this can stretch, because it definitely can stretch, from mid-underarm over to the corner of our underarm. So just as a refresher, we have 2 moss stitch rows with no increases and no decreases. And then we have a back loop slip stitch row that ends on an increase, and then our next back loop slip stitch row that starts on an increase, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, making our way down. Now we're just going to continue on with these 4 rows until we're ready to get started on our shoulder. So I will meet you guys back right after we end our first back loop slip stitch row. So the back loop slip stitch row that ends along the top right after we finish an increase. Alright, so my underarm portion is now all finished up. I have a total of 7 rows, and my width is just about 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters. And right before we get started on the shoulders, I just wanted to mention that this portion may slant just a little bit, but that's completely normal. It'll all be evened out when it's seamed. But now from here, we should have all ended right after our first back loop slip stitch row, which we should all have an odd number of stitches. From here, we're going to make an odd number of chains that reaches all the way up to our shoulder. And I've already measured mine out. I need a total of about 7 inches or 18 centimeters. So I'm going to start by making a chain of 27. And now that we have our chain, we're going to do the following row in our row sequence, which is going to be a back loop slip stitch row. So right after our chain, we're going to start by blocking off that last chain, do a chain 1. Now that chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, that's just our turning chain. And then into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, we're going to insert with a slip stitch. So insert your hook, yarn over, and gently pull through everything on our hook. Let's do just one more. Into that next chain, insert your hook, yarn over, and pull through everything. And from here, continue to put one slip stitch into every chain, and then I'll meet you guys back right when we're about to get started on our back loop slip stitches into the body. And now that we made our way all the way down our chain with our slip stitches, we are now down at the body. So now we're just going to be doing back loop slip stitches. So if we need to turn our work, go for it, and just double check and make sure that we aren't skipping that last slip stitch from our previous row, because remember, when we do an increase, it could very easily be tucked underneath. So just find that first stitch, insert into that back loop, following stitch, insert into that back loop with another slip stitch. And continue to put one back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and at the end of this row, just double check and make sure that we have an even number of stitches. And now that our first row for our shoulder is all finished up, we're going to continue on with our 4-row repeat until we get a shoulder width that we like. So right after this row, we're going to chain 2, because we're going to get started on our moss stitch row, flip our work, skip that first stitch, and then into that following stitch, a single crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, and then single crochet. Now at the end of this row, we're going to chain 2, flip our work, do another moss stitch row. At the end of that row, chain 1, and then do 2 back loop slip stitch rows. And from there, we're just going to continue to repeat with no increases and no decreases until we get the shoulder width that we like. So if you want a thinner shoulder strap, make it thin, or if you want a thicker one, go ahead and make it a little chunkier. But I will meet you guys back right after a second back loop slip stitch row, because we need to end along the bottom so we can get started on the cups. Alright, so I am back and my shoulder portion is now all finished. I have a total of 12 rows now, and my width is just about 3 inches or 18 centimeters. And now from here, we're going to get started on our cup. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is insert our stitch marker into an even number of stitches from the top where we want our neck scoop to start to curve. So if you guys want to cover a little bit more of your chest, insert your stitch marker higher, or a little bit lower, go ahead and go as low as you want. But I want mine to be just around the middle. So I inserted my stitch marker into the 18th stitch from the top, and this is just about 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And now we're going to get started on the following row in our 4-row repeat, which should be a moss stitch row. So since we're along the bottom and starting a moss stitch row, we're going to chain 2, flip our work, and just do the first one, skip that first stitch, into that following stitch, single crochet, and continue to do our moss stitch until we reach our stitch marker. And now that I've reached my stitch marker, I'm going to do the following row in our 4-row repeat, which is a moss stitch row. So as you guys can probably tell, we aren't going to be doing any increases or decreases into our moss stitch rows. So at the end of this moss stitch row, we're going to get started on our first back loop slip stitch row. So just like usual, we're going to chain 1, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, leaving the last 2 so that we can decrease into there together. So we just finished up our second moss stitch row for our cup, and then made our way all the way back up with our back loop slip stitch rows, and we have left 1, 2 stitches left, and now we're going to decrease together. So start by inserting your hook into that second to last stitches back loop. We're going to yarn over and pull through. Once we have those 2 loops on our hook, we're going to find the last back loop into our previous row, insert our hook, and then once we have those 3 loops on our hook, we're just going to yarn over and pull through all 3. Now, this is our first back loop slip stitch row. We're going to be doing another decrease for our next back loop slip stitch row. So since we're along the top, we're going to chain 1, flip our work, and start with a decrease. So to do our decrease once more, find the last stitch from our previous row and insert our hook into that back loop, yarn over, pull through, insert your hook into that following stitch's back loop. Once we have those 3 loops, yarn over and pull through all 3. And then from here, continue to put one back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And then we're going to continue on with our 4-row repeat, now with the decreases that we just did together. So just as a refresher, right after this row, we're going to be doing 2 moss stitch rows, then a back loop slip stitch row that ends on a decrease of 2. Then for our following back loop slip stitch row, start with a decrease of 2 and then put one back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And from there, we're just going to continue to repeat those 4 rows until this can stretch over to the middle of our chest, making sure that we end on our first moss stitch row along the top. Alright, so I am back with the first half of my cup. Now I have a total of 21 rows and my width is just about 5 inches or 13 centimeters. And now we're going to repeat everything that we just did here on the other side, making sure that it is mirrored. So how we're going to start our second half is, since we should have all ended right after a moss stitch row, we're going to repeat that. So our following row is going to be another moss stitch row. No increases and no decreases. So since we're along the top, we're going to chain 2, flip our work, and then just do our moss stitch row, making our way all the way back down. Now our following row is going to be a back loop slip stitch row. So at the end of this row, chain 1, flip our work, and then put one back loop slip stitch into every stitch, leaving the last one. And a really quick tip that I like to do, it's not necessary, is inserting a stitch marker into those 2 middle stitches, because our previous moss stitch row and the moss stitch row that we're working on right now technically counts as our middle rows. So I will just be inserting my stitch marker into both of those rows, just so that it's a little bit easier for me to count out my rows. But go ahead and get this row and the following row finished up, and then I will meet you back. So now that we've made our way all the way back up with our back loop slip stitch row, we should have 1 stitch left, and now we're going to do an increase of 2 into that last back loop. So start by inserting your hook into that last stitch's back loop, and we're going to do 1 back loop slip stitch, and then 1 more back loop slip stitch into that same stitch. Just like that. And from here, just get started on the following row. We're going to chain 1 and flip our work. So since we're along the top, we are going to start with an increase of 2. So into the first stitch from our previous row, insert into that back loop with 1 back loop slip stitch, and then into that same back loop with a second back loop slip stitch, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And from here, we're just going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows. So right after this row, we're going to be doing 2 moss stitch rows with no increases and no decreases, and then a back loop slip stitch row that ends on an increase of 2. And then our following back loop slip stitch row is going to start with an increase of 2 and then 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Now from there, we're going to continue to repeat those 4 rows until we have the same amount of rows as the first half of our cup. Now once we have the same amount of rows all finished up, we will actually end along the bottom. So I will meet you guys back just to show you guys how we're going to work into our shoulder. Alright, so I am back and the second half of my cup is all finished. Now we should have ended along the bottom, and now we need to work all the way up to the shoulder. So what we're going to do is just do a chain 1. Now if you guys can't reach the other end of your yarn, go ahead and do a chain up of 1 and cut. But if you guys can use that end, like me, I'm just going to pull a little bit of slack. We're going to leave that there. We're not going to do anything to that. And then I'm going to insert my hook into this top corner stitch, insert the tail end of my yarn onto my hook, and pull through. Now from here, we're going to be making a chain for the same amount of stitches that we skipped along this side of our neckline. So if you guys have my numbers, I skipped 18 stitches. So over here, I'm going to make a chain of 18 and then cut. Alright, and now that I have my shoulder chain right here, I did do my chain up 1 and cut. And now I'm going to be reinserting my hook into this bottom corner stitch. And then from here, I'm going to continue to do my 4-row repeat. So starting with the following row that we have in our row sequence should be a back loop slip stitch row. So from here, all I'm going to do is chain 1, flip my work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, including all the way up into my chain. And just to remind you guys, working into this junction right here may be a little tricky, but once we're done with all of our back loop slip stitches, just double check and make sure that we do have an even number of stitches, or the same amount of stitches that we had for this back loop slip stitch row right over here. Right after that is going to be another back loop slip stitch row, And then following that, 2 moss stitch rows, and none of those rows will have any increases or decreases. Now we're just going to continue to do that until we have the same amount of rows as shoulder rows that we have over here, and then I will meet you guys back so that we can do the underarm portion together. Now once we have that all finished up, we will be ending along the top, so right after that we will do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then I'll show you guys how we're going to be doing our underarm portion from there. Alright, so my second shoulder portion is all finished up. I have a total of 35 rows now, and my width is just about 8 inches or 20 centimeters. Now we need to finish up our front panel by doing our second underarm portion. So like I said in the previous clip, we should have all ended along the top and did a chain up of 1 and cut. The next thing we're going to do is insert our stitch marker for the same amount of chains that we made when we worked our way all the way up to our shoulder. So if you guys have my numbers, I made a chain of 27. So along the side, counting from the top, I counted down 27 stitches and then inserted my stitch marker. Now from here, because we need to keep up with the ribbing, we're going to be inserting our hook into that following stitch that we have, working down towards the bottom, and then we're going to start with a decrease of 2 back loop slip stitches. So we're all going to start by inserting our hook into that following stitch that we have, making sure we're inserting into that back loop only. Insert your yarn onto your hook, pull through, and then we're going to do a chain up of 1 to secure. Now our decrease of 2 back loop slip stitches is going to start into that same stitch that our chain 1 is into, and then into that following stitch. So into that same stitch, insert into that back loop, pull through, also into that following back loop. Once we have those 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, and pull through all 3. And then from here, continue to put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And at the end of this row, we're going to be doing 2 moss stitch rows with no increases and no decreases. And once we have those 2 moss stitch rows all finished up, I will be meeting you guys back just so I can do another decrease with you guys once more. Alright, so I'm back. We have just finished up our first back loop slip stitch row for our underarm, our 2 moss stitch rows, and now we're going to do our following back loop slip stitch row that ends on a decrease together. So now, since we should all be along the bottom, just chain 1, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, leaving the last 2. So now that we worked our way back up with our back loop slip stitch, we should have 2 stitches left, so let's just do our decrease together once more. Start by inserting your hook into that second to last back loop, pull through, and then into that following stitch's back loop. Once we have those 3 loops, yarn over, pull through all 3, and then our following row is going to be another slip stitch row that starts with a decrease. So just to get that started off together, just chain 1, flip our work. Start by inserting your hook into that first stitch's back loop, pull through, insert your hook into that following stitch's back loop, and once we have those 3 loops, yarn over and pull through all 3. And put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch till we reach the end of the row, and that's it. From here, we're just going to continue to do our 2 moss stitch rows with no increases and no decreases, and then our 2 back loop slip stitch rows that have decreases within them for the same amount of rows that we have for our first underarm portion right over here. And once we have the same amount of rows, do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then I will meet you back. Alright, so we are back, and the entirety of my front panel is all finished, and I did do a chain up of 1 and cut. Now from here, we're going to get started on our back panel, but it's going to be done pretty much the same way as our front panel, but we aren't going to have this scoop. So I actually have already finished mine up, so I'm just going to talk you guys through it. Getting started on our back panel, we're all going to start by making the same chain that we made for the front panel, and then we're going to keep up with our row sequence with the same amount of increases that we did and rows as our front panel. Then we're going to make a chain that reaches all the way up to our shoulder, the same chain that we made for the front panel, and then we're just going to work our way all the way across with our 4-row repeat for the same amount of rows that we have from our first shoulder row over here, working all the way across to our last shoulder row right over here. Then we should all end up along the top, so do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then we're going to do the same underarm that we did for the front panel, and then that's it. Go ahead and get the entirety of your back panel all finished up, and then I will meet you guys back so we can seam everything together. So now that we have both front and back panel all finished up, the next thing we're going to do is seam our shoulders. So first things first, we're all going to make sure that our work is flipped wrong side out because we want our shoulder seams to be along the inside. So how we're going to be able to tell if it's flipped right side out? you can see a very clear ribbing along the front like this. We want those two panels to be touching each other. And then from there, we're going to be inserting our hook into the corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. Go ahead and insert your yarn onto your hook, pull through, and then we're going to do a chain up of 1 to secure. Now from here, we're going to be putting 1 single crochet into every side row that we have, so let's get that started. So our first side row that we should have should be a side slip stitch row. All I'm going to do is find that top loop and insert my hook into there within the front panel. Find that same top loop within the back panel, insert my hook into there, and then I'm going to single crochet them together. That's it. Let's do the following row. Now our next side row should be a side slip stitch row, so find that top loop, insert your hook in through the front panel, find that next top loop of the next moss stitch row within the back panel and insert your hook into there, and then single crochet, and that's it. From here, just continue to put 1 single crochet into every side row. When we don't have any more side rows left to work into, do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then repeat everything we just did here on the other side. And now that we have just finished up seaming our shoulders on both sides, the next seam that we're going to do is our sides. So for the sides, we're going to make sure that our work is flipped right side out now, meaning the ribbing that we have for the front and the back panel is faced outwards, and then we're going to be inserting our hook into the bottom corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. Now from here, we're going to be inserting our yarn onto our hook. We're going to pull through, do a chain up of 1 to secure, and now we're going to be doing an outside loop slip stitch seam just so it can look like another ribbed row. So within the front panel, we're going to find that first available stitch, and then we're going to find that front loop or the loop that's nearest to us and insert our hook into there. The next thing we're going to do is find that next available stitch into the back panel and then insert your hook only in through that back loop. And once we have that, all we're going to do is just yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops. There's our first one. Let's do the next one. This is my next stitch that I have right here within the front panel. I'm just going to insert my hook in through that front loop or the loop that's nearest to us. Could be a little bit tricky, but it is possible. And then we're going to find that next available stitch into the back panel, insert our hook into that back loop, and then just yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. And that's it. Just continue to do this until we don't have any more stitches left to work into, and then do a chain up of 1 and cut, then do the same thing we just did here on the other side. Alright, so now that everything is all seamed together, the next thing I'm going to start working on is our waistband. So first things first, make sure that our work is flipped right side out, meaning our shoulder seams are along the inside and our side seams are along the outside. Next, we're going to be inserting our hook into any one of the side rows that we have along the bottom. You're going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, and then all we're going to do is put 1 single crochet into every side row, making our way all the way around, so let's just do the first few together. So right after we pulled our yarn through, we're going to chain 1, and we're going to start by finding our first side row. Now this is my first side row that I have right here, which is a side moss stitch row, but if your first side row is a side slip stitch row, that's completely fine too. Just find that top loop, and all we're going to do is insert our hook into there and then single crochet. Now if you guys are wondering why I'm pulling my tail ends over my hook, that's just so that I don't have to weave in these ends later. So if you just hold it over the loop that you inserted your hook into and then continue on with your stitch, it's now in the middle of the stitch so we don't have to weave it in. So let's just do another one. Now this is my next side row, which is another side moss stitch row. So I'm just going to find that top loop, insert my hook into there with a single crochet. Now just to show you guys what my side slip stitch rows look like, I'm going to find my first side slip stitch row, which is this divot right here. Insert my hook into that top loop with a single. And then this is my next side slip stitch row right here. Find that top loop and insert with another single. And that's it. We're just going to continue to do this, making our way all the way around, slip stitch into that chain space, and then I will meet you back. So our single crochet row is all finished up, and now we're going to get started on the length of our waistband. So from where we're at, we're all going to start by making a chain the length that we want it to be. Now I would like for mine to be just about 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain of 8. And now that we have our chain, what we're going to do from here is block off that last chain. Do a chain 1, that doesn't count as a stitch, that's just a turning chain, and from here we're going to be putting 1 slip stitch into every chain. So starting with that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, we're just going to insert our hook into there, and when we have those 2 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through everything, and same rules apply for these slip stitches as well. Make sure that we're not accidentally tugging too tightly on our stitch. Now once we made our way all the way down with our slip stitch row, we do need to connect it into the base. So how we're going to do that is find that next available stitch into the base. This is mine right here. And all I'm going to do is insert my hook into there with a slip stitch to close off this row. And now that we have that, we need to work our way up to our following row, which is going to be another back loop slip stitch row. So find that next stitch into the base, insert your hook into there with a slip stitch, and then flip our work. Now from here, we're going to find the last stitch from our previous row, insert your hook in through that back loop, and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And now that we're at the end of our row 2, to get started on our row 3, since we're along the outside, just chain 1, flip our work, and then continue to put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And just to connect it into the base once more, we're going to find that next available stitch into the base. This is mine. I'm going to insert my hook into there with a slip stitch. And then to work our way up to the following row, find that next stitch into the base, slip stitch into there, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and that is it. From there, we're just going to continue to repeat those 2 previous rows with no increases and no decreases until we don't have any more stitches into the base to work into, and then I will meet you back so we can seam everything together. Alright, so I am back. I've made my way all the way around with my back loop slip stitch rows. We don't have any more stitches left to work into the base, and now we're going to seam it up. So this is going to be the same seam that we did for our sides, which was an outside loop slip stitch seam. So first things first, make sure that our work is flipped right side out. Next, we're going to be inserting our hook into the corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. And since we already know how to do this, let's just do the first few together. So getting started on the seam, we're going to yarn over and pull through everything on our hook so that both panels are now connected. Then we're going to pinch both of those together, and now we can get started. Start by finding that first available stitch into the front panel and insert our hook only in through that front loop or the loop that's nearest to us. Then we're going to find that next available stitch into the back panel and insert our hook into that back loop or the loop that's furthest away from us. And once we have those 3 loops on our hook, just yarn over and pull through all 3. And that's it. Continue to do this until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. Do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then I will meet you back. And now that this is all seamed up, we're ready to get started on our peplum portion. So the first thing we're going to have to do is actually just single crochet along the bottom of our waistband that we just did. So start by making sure that our work is flipped right side out, and then we're going to insert our hook into any one of the side rows that we have along the bottom. Insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, do a chain up of 1 to secure, and now we're just going to be putting 1 single crochet into every side row. So start by finding our first side row. This raised one is mine right here. I'm just going to find that top loop and single crochet into there. Now my next side row is this divot. I'm going to insert my hook into that top loop and single crochet, and continue to put 1 single crochet into every side row, slip stitch into that chain space, and then I will meet you back. Alright, so now that our single crochet row along the bottom of our waistband is all finished up, the next thing we're going to start working on is the actual peplum portion. So right after we slip stitched into that chain space, we're now going to make an odd number chain the length that we want our peplum portion to be. So I would like for mine to be just about 6 inches or 15 centimeters. So I'm going to start by making a chain of 25. And now that we have our chain, we're going to get started on our peplum portion. So how that's going to work is we're going to start by blocking off that last chain and do a chain 1. Now that chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, that's just our turning chain. And then into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, we're going to insert with a single crochet and a double crochet into that same chain. So bring our hook down into that second chain and insert your hook with a single crochet, and then also a double crochet. So start with a yarn over, insert your hook into that same chain, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now that is our first Suzette stitch set. Let's do the next one. Now after every set, we are always going to be skipping our following stitch because if we don't, we're going to be accidentally increasing. And this double crochet counts as that stitch. So skip the following stitch, into the next, another single, and then another double crochet all into that same stitch. So all together, we should have one Suzette stitch set, a skip stitch, and then a Suzette stitch set. Let's do just one more. Skip that following chain, into the next, insert with a single, and then insert with a double crochet. And that's it. Continue to do this until we have just 2 chains left. Alright, so now that we have done our Suzette stitch, making our way all the way down, we should have 2 chains left. And from here, we're just going to half double crochet into that last chain. So starting with yarn over, we're going to skip that second to last chain, then into the last, we're going to insert our hook, yarn over, pull through. Once we have those 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops, and now our first row is all finished up. Now I do need to slip stitch it into the base, so start by finding that next available stitch into the base, insert your hook into there, yarn over, pull through everything to connect this first row. And then we do need to work our way up to the following row, so all that's going to be is finding that next stitch into the base, slip stitching into there, flipping our work, and then starting with our Suzette stitch, making our way all the way down. So just as a refresher, it's going to be a single crochet and a double crochet into the same stitch, skip a stitch, and then a single and a double into that same following stitch. So let's just do the first few. Now working down towards the bottom, the first Suzette stitch set is going to be worked into the top of that half double crochet that we did from our previous row. So into the top of that stitch, there goes a single and a double. Skip the following stitch, and then into the stitch right after that, a single and a double. Now a fun fact that I have when it comes to doing our Suzette stitch set, each of our sets are going to be worked into our previous row's single crochet so that we get the texture that we want. So just as an example, I just finished a set. We're going to be skipping the following stitch, which is a double crochet from our previous row, and we can tell it because it's raised a little bit higher than that next one. So we're going to skip that stitch, and then into that following stitch, a single and a double, and continue to do this until we have 2 stitches left. Alright, so we've done our Suzette stitches, making our way all the way down, and we should have just 2 stitches left. So all we're going to do, just like our previous row, is yarn over, skip that second to last stitch, and then half double crochet into that last. Now really quickly, it could possibly look like we only have 1 stitch left, but we do have 2. If you flip your work over, then that second stitch is a little tucked underneath. So all we're going to do is insert our hook into that last stitch with a half double crochet. And now our row 2 is all finished up. Now to get started on our row 3, it's going to be the same. So just chain 1, flip our work, and then into the last stitch from our previous row, start with a Suzette stitch set, skip a stitch, and then into the following, another Suzette stitch set. Now continue to do this, making our way all the way down, including doing a half double crochet into that last stitch. And then I will meet you guys back to show you how we're going to connect it into the base, because we're going to need it to ruffle out just a little bit. Alright, so we have made our way all the way down with our row 3, and now we're going to connect it into the base. Now what we're going to do whenever we're working in towards the base is we're going to slip stitch it into that same stitch that our previous row was worked into. So we would normally just work into the next available stitch, but for this, since we need it to ruffle, we're going to be inserting it into the stitch right before that available stitch. So this one should be used up by our previous row, but we're just going to insert our hook into there again with a slip stitch, and that's just how we connect our row. Now once we need to work our way up to the following row, we're going to work into that available stitch with a slip stitch, flip our work, and then continue. Now since we know how to do our Suzette stitch sets, finish this row. At the end of this row, chain 1, flip our work, and then do our Suzette stitches all the way back. I'm going to show you guys how to connect it into the base just once more right after that. Alright, so now that we have made our way all the way back down towards our base, we're going to connect it into the base together once more. So remember, when we're working our way down towards the base, we're going to slip stitch into that same stitch that our previous row is worked into. So not into this available stitch, but into the previous stitch with a slip stitch to close off this row, And then when we need to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch up that next available stitch, flip our work, and then repeat. And that's it. From here, we're just going to continue to repeat these 2 rows, making our way all the way around with no increases and no decreases until we don't have any more stitches left to work into the base. And then I'll meet you guys back so we can seam everything together. So I have made my way all the way around with my rows, and my peplum portion is all finished up. I don't have any more stitches left to work into, so now we're going to seam it together. So this is going to be a single crochet seam, so make sure that our work is now flipped wrong side out so that this seam can be along the inside. And then we are going to insert our hook into the corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. But since we already know how to do this seam, we're just going to do the first few together. Well, all we're going to do is pull through, do a chain 1 to secure, and we're all going to start by finding that first stitch into the front panel, insert your hook into there. Find that first stitch into the back panel, insert your hook into there with a single. Let's just do one more. Find that next stitch into the front panel and insert your hook. Find the next stitch into the back panel and then insert your hook into there, and then that is it. We're just going to continue to do this until we don't have any more stitches left to work into, and then do a chain up of 1 and cut. Alright, so now that our peplum is all finished up, we're now going to get started on our sleeve. So first things first, we're going to want to make sure that our work is flipped right side out, and we're going to be inserting our hook into the last stitch that we have for our side seam. Now from here, we're going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, and we're all going to start with a single crochet row. So working up our underarm portion, we're going to be putting 1 single crochet into every side row, and then working up and back down over our shoulder, there's just going to be 1 single crochet into every stitch. So let's get this started. So let's all start by finding our first side row, which should be a moss stitch row. So we're just going to insert our hook into that top loop. And if you guys want to grab your tail ends, just place it over your hook and then single crochet. Now let's do our next single crochet. We all need to start by finding our following side row, which should be another moss stitch row. Insert your hook into that top loop with 1 single crochet again. And then that's it. We're going to put 1 single crochet into every side row, including each of the slip stitch rows, single crochet all the way around. Once we reach that underarm portion along the back, put 1 single crochet into every side row again. Slip stitch into that chain space, and then I'll meet you guys back. Alright, so our single crochet row is all finished up, and now we can get started on our Suzette stitch sleeves. So this is going to be a row that we increase into, so let's get this started together. Now to get started on our first Suzette stitch row, after we slip stitched into that chain space, all we're going to do is chain 1, and then we're going to find the first stitch from our previous row, and then we're going to insert with our Suzette stitch, which if we remember, it is a single crochet and a double crochet, all into the same stitch. Now from here, we're going to skip the following stitch, which is what we always do. And then into the stitch right after that, we're going to do a single and a double, so our second Suzette stitch set. But right after that, we're going to be doing another Suzette stitch set into the stitch directly after that one. So we would typically be skipping this one, but since we need to increase, all we're going to do is into that following stitch, a single and a double. And then once when we have those 2 Suzette stitch sets right next to each other, we are then going to skip a stitch and then do a Suzette stitch set all alone by itself. So we're going to skip a stitch into the stitch right after, single crochet, and double crochet. So altogether we should have 4 sets, and that's going to be our first set, our skip stitch, our 2 sets right next to each other, a skip stitch, and then another singular set by itself. And that's it. From here we're just going to continue to do this, making our way all the way around. And sometimes it can get a little bit tricky to work into because sometimes things get a little blurred if you're looking at it for too long. But a really quick tip that I have for you guys is actually inserting your stitch marker into the singular Suzette stitch sets that we have, just so we can figure out how many sets we have or what our following set should be. So I inserted my first one into there, my next one into my following singular Suzette stitch set, and then from here we're going to repeat. So I'm going to do this with you guys one more time. So we just finished up our 4th set, and that should be our singular set. From here, we're going to skip the following stitch, and then do a set into the following 2 stitches. So we're going to skip 1, into that next stitch, with 1 set, so a single and a double, and then into that following stitch, a single and a double. So 2 sets directly next to each other. And once we have those 2, we're going to skip a stitch, and then into the stitch right after that, a singular set. So just a single and a double. And since this is our singular set, I'm just going to insert my stitch marker into there. And that's it. This is what we should have so far, and we're just going to continue to do this, making our way all the way around until we have 2 stitches left. And then I'll meet you guys back just to remind you that we need to half double crochet into that last stitch. So we have just made our way all the way around with our first Suzette stitch row, which was an increase row, and now we have a total of 2 rows. So now that we only have 2 stitches left, we're going to half double crochet into that last stitch. So just yarn over, skip the second to last, and then into that last, insert with a half double crochet. Now from here, we're going to slip stitch it into the chain space where we started off this row to close this row off. And now that that's all finished up, we are only going to be increasing into every 4th row. So the following 3 rows are going to continue to be Suzette stitch rows, but with no increases and no decreases. And then we're going to increase together into the row after that. So from where we're at, we're going to chain 1 and flip our work, remembering that we do need to flip our work. And we're all going to start by inserting our hook into the first stitch from our previous Suzette stitch row, or the top of the half double crochet we just did. We're going to do our first set, skip the following stitch, and then a Suzette stitch set into the next. And that's it. We're going to be doing a total of 3 additional rows, and I will meet you back when we have a total of 5 rows finished. That is including our first single crochet row, just so I can show you guys how we're going to be increasing from then on. Alright, so I am back, and I have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 rows all finished up. Now our following row is going to be yet another increase row, because remember, like I said, we're going to be increasing into every 4th row. So this following increase row that we're going to do is going to be the same way that we're going to increase for the rest of the sleeve. So I'm just going to do this following row with you guys. So what we're going to do right after we do our slip stitch into that chain space, we're going to chain 1, flip our work, and then we're going to start by putting 1 Suzette stitch set into the first stitch from our previous row. So this is pretty usual. And then from here, we're going to be putting 3 Suzette stitch sets next to each other. So pretty similar to how we did the first increase row, but instead of 2 next to each other, we're going to have 3. So what we're going to do is skip that following stitch, which should be a double crochet from our previous row. Into that next stitch, we're going to do our first Suzette stitch set. Into our following stitch, which should be a double crochet from our previous row again, we're going to insert with another Suzette stitch set. And then into that following stitch, which should be a single crochet from our previous row. Now altogether we should have 1 Suzette stitch set, but since this is a singular one, I'm going to be inserting my stitch marker into there just so I can count this a little bit easier. Right after that singular set, we have a skipped stitch, and then 3 sets right next to each other. And from there, we're just going to continue to repeat, so let's just do this once more. After our 3 sets that are right next to each other, we're going to skip that following stitch, into the stitch right after that, do just 1 set, and I will be inserting my stitch marker into there as well. And then right after that singular set, we're going to be doing our set of 3 right next to each other. So skip that following stitch, into the stitch right after that, there goes 1, into the stitch right after that one, which is another set, and then 1 more set into that following stitch. And then just to close this off for good measure, you're going to skip that following stitch, and then into the stitch right after that, a singular set, and then we're going to insert our stitch marker. And that's it. This is what we should all have so far. So a singular Suzette stitch set, skip stitch, 3 sets right next to each other, skip stitch, another singular set, and then repeat. Now we're going to continue to do this just for this row, remembering that we do need to end every Suzette stitch row on a half double crochet. Our following 3 rows won't have any increases or decreases. And then into the row right after that, which would be our 10th row, we're going to do another increase the same way that we did this row. And we're just going to continue to repeat those 4 rows until we have the sleeve length that we want. Once we have that, go ahead and do a chain up of 1 and cut. Repeat the same thing that we just did here on the other side, and then I will meet you back. Alright, so I am back and I've just finished up my sleeves. And I did want my sleeves to be shorter sleeves, so I only did a total of 16 rows. But now that we have both of our sleeves all finished up, the last thing we're going to have to do is a collar. So first things first, we're going to make sure that our work is flipped right side out, and then we're going to be inserting our hook into any one of the stitches along the back. So go ahead and flip your work over so that we're looking at the back panel. Now we're going to start with a single crochet row, so this is going to be pretty simple. All we're going to do, now that our hook is in through any one of the side rows along the back, we're going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, do a chain up of 1 to secure, and we're all going to start by putting 1 single crochet into every side row. So let's just do the first few. My first side row is this side moss stitch row right here, so I'm going to find that top loop, and all I'm going to do is do 1 single crochet. Now my next side row is this side slip stitch row, so I'm going to insert my hook into there with a single crochet. Find my next side row, which is this side slip stitch row, so find that top loop and single crochet. And that's it. We're going to continue to do this, making our way across our back. Now once we make it to the front panel, we have some regular stitches to work into, so just put 1 single crochet into every stitch, and then along the bottom of our neckline, we're going to continue to put 1 single crochet into every side row, and just continue to do that, making our way all the way around, and then slip stitch into that chain space, and then I'll meet you guys back. Alright, so my single crochet row along my neckline is all finished up, and now we're going to get started on the length of our collar. So getting our collar started, we're all going to start by making a chain the length that we would like for our collar to be. Now I'd like mine to be just about 1 inch or 2 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain of 4. Now that we have our chain, we are going to block off that last chain, do a chain 1, and then into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, insert with a slip stitch. And this is actually going to be done the same exact way that we did the waistband. So same rules apply. Make sure that we're not accidentally tugging too tightly on every slip stitch so that the following row isn't too tight to work into. Now that we've put 1 slip stitch into every chain, just like how we did for the waistband, we're going to slip stitch it into the base. So start by finding that next available stitch into the base, slip stitch into there, and now our row 1 is all closed off. Now to work our way up to row 2, slip stitch up that following stitch, flip our work, and then we're going to put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and then that's it. We're going to continue to do our back loop slip stitch rows, connecting it into the base the same way that we just did, with no increases and no decreases until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. And then I will meet you back just to remind you how we're going to seam our collar together. Alright, so we've just made our way all the way around with our back loop slip stitch rows. We don't have any more stitches left to work into the base, so now we're just going to seam it all up together. So this is going to be an outside loop slip stitch seam. So first things first, make sure that our work is flipped right side out. Then we're going to insert our hook into the corner stitch of both the front and the back panel, and since we already know how to do this, we're just going to do the first one together. So what we're going to do is yarn over, pull through everything on our hook, and then just to do the first one, we're going to find that first available stitch into the front panel, insert in through that front loop, find that next available stitch into the back panel, insert in through that back loop, and once we have those 3 loops, just yarn over and pull through all 3. And that's it. Continue to do this until we don't have any more stitches left to work into, and then do a chain up of 1 and cut. Alright, so now that our collar is all seamed up, we are all done. The last thing we're going to have to do is just weave in all of our ends. And there you have it. Hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. Join us on Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter. Those links are down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Catch you on the next one. Bye!